All right, Brian. So I read the Star Wars Heresies, interpreting the themes, symbols, and philosophies of episodes 1, 2, and 3 by Paul F. McDonald. Kind of like in 2020, kind of like the summer of 2020, and then finished it early 2021. So I was like, I probably need to take a lot of notes because it's been a while. But today I found out I took 2 separate instances of notes. So I have like 10 plus pages of notes, honestly.
That is amazing. Yeah, you dug into the Old Republic podcast Jedi archives and found your old notes. I really like that. It would be fun to go through and see like if you took different notes or like how much of the notes are the same in taking them. But 10 pages of notes is pretty good because if you just look at the actual like chapter here for Revenge of the Sith, it's only like 60 pages, so that's like 1 page of notes for every 6 pages of text, so that is pretty good.
Oh, well, thank you. So if some people are like, well, I was going to give this podcast 5 stars, but then I heard paper rustling noises. I'm just very analog, and I like just writing things out so I can see them rather than like taking notes digitally. So if you can hear paper rustling, that's intentional. It's because I'm reading them.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, I mean, it is important to take notes, especially if you're going to be doing something like reading the Star Wars Heresies section, because there's a lot to go through and discuss, right? We've talked about this now twice and covering the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And we talked a little bit just kind of about the book, The Star Wars Heresies, here by Paul F. McDonald, and how it kind of, breaks down each of the films by kind of like character groups of characters. So here we have, kind of sections on Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme, of course, and then, like the Jedi Council and kind of the galaxy at large, so to speak. So this is going to ring in kind of the final chapter, quite literally here, of our prequel trilogy sort of analysis in terms of the Star Wars Heresies. So pretty exciting stuff, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, in your free time you do drink the movies, and right now you're doing drink the music, and I was kind of thinking this book is kind of made up of like 3 albums. You have the Phantom Menace, the Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith, and I think like all the albums are great. Not every song, by which I mean chapter, is a hit, but right. I can see where they're coming from, and there's intention there and follow through. I never read any of these chapters and I was like, oh, it's sloppy. But I think today we were discussing like my favorite section or album. Like I think like the analysis of Revenge of the Sith is my favorite, then followed by The Phantom Menace and then Attack of the Clones. But it's a very literate book.
Yeah, it is very literate, and I do like kind of that analogy of kind of comparing it to an album, right? Because it breaks down kind of each of the films, and then kind of each of the sections, like I said. So each one is kind of like its own like track of the story, so to speak. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, the Revenge of the Sith section is pretty good. I think if I was going to rank them, maybe we'll talk just about the book kind of as a whole after we finish up our conversation here. I would say that the Revenge of the Sith section is probably my second favorite of the book, behind the Phantom Menace. But yeah, we can kind of talk just a little bit about kind of the book as a whole, almost. Once we get to the end, and there's a little after chapter that discusses kind of the maker, George Lucas. So maybe we'll get into that here once we get through kind of these different sections of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, the first chapter for Revenge of the Sith is the fall, and I think it's such a good quote they had to start it. And if you think about it, like Count Dooku says, twice the pride, double the fall, at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. And like, I think I always kind of just thought he was just saying it to taunt Anakin, but if you kind of think about it, like, it kind of applies to the Republic and the Jedi Council too, It's kind of a Greek tragedy. We see how it progressed from 1, 2, and 3, and yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I like that quote there to kind of get us started off here, and you could even look at it, even more literally, as twice the pride as, Count Dooku and Anakin, both being prideful and both kind of fall here at the same moment. Obviously, with Dooku quite literally losing his head here in this instant, but obviously that is, pretty much the kickoff here for Revenge of the Sith and his downward spiral. So I really liked kind of the literal sense of that quote too. So it was a really great quote to get us started. And then there's another quote here kind of at the beginning of the fall section by Joseph Campbell. It says, tragedy is the shattering of the forms and of our attachment to the forms. And I like that too, because that kind of looks as the galaxy as a whole and the way that the Republic is structured, but then also into Anakin Skywalker, personally, his attachment there is really, what is being shattered here as we get into his fall. And then it, goes on to talk a little bit in the chapter, kind of the fall of like biblical falls and how that works. Adam and Eve, eating the forbidden fruit, and thus is a downfall. And then even like symbolically within the film, it kind of points out, which isn't something that I'd ever picked up on, but all of our heroes of the story basically falls. So Yoda kind of falls down to a knee on Kashyyyk. Obi-Wan falls from that cliffside on Utapau. Padme falls after I guess her heart is broken. Nah, just kidding. After she's choked there on Mustafar. R2 falls on Grievous's ship at the beginning of the film, and Mace Windu obviously falls out of the window. So there's a lot of actual like physical falling by our heroes in there, which kind of can represent the fall as well.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't think it's like, I guess it's symbolism, but it's like they're falling literally, but also symbolically at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Now some of that stuff, you could definitely see. I mean, Yoda falling to his knee is something I think that was done, for that purpose, right? Symbolically. Yeah. The R2 one, is that symbolic? I don't know. I think you can find ways to kind of tie anything, right? He's kind of falling because it's this fun, ship sequence, but literally like Obi-Wan falling there on Utapau from that cliff, or Yoda, falling to his knee, I think can be symbolic here. So those are kind of the ones that were picked out within this chapter.
Yeah, and you kind of just see, like, the fall probably comes about most because Anakin's attachment has grown, like, kind of to obsession, and it's just interesting to kind of, like, I haven't read Faust yet, but I plan to in the future, and it would just be kind of fun to, like, kind of see, like, if, like, what parallels there are, with Star Wars and the prequel trilogy especially, but I kind of liked how it talked about, like, on page 132, such a psychological interpretation yields a universal acknowledgement of the inevitability of death. With the birth of modern self-consciousness some 30 or 40,000 years ago, came this traumatizing realization which countless myths and stories have provided context for. Like, that's kind of like where a lot of mythologies, legends, and stories, and even looking at Gilgamesh, which is like the oldest recovered story that we have today, it's about people trying to rationalize, like, why does death happen, and I kind of talked about the books I read, like, about, like, Caitlin Doughty, who runs the Order of the Good Death, like From Here to Eternity and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. But it's something we're still grappling with today, and, I mean, the prequel trilogy dealt with it, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And you have kind of a lot of parallels, and just in my own kind of thinking and the way I see things, you see a lot of stories of tragedies, of falls, just kind of throughout recorded storytelling, because those are those are more like cautionary tale types of stories, so they're very easy to kind of pass down. Be careful, don't do this thing that Anakin Skywalker did, or you will fall. So I think that the tragedy has a really important place, just kind of in humanity's storytelling, as well as like I said, kind of this warning of what could happen. So I think that they're a really integral part of the society and our storytelling mechanisms just as a whole, on a side note.
Yeah. I'm so intrigued by, did Star Wars kind of like, what came first, like, for Cassia? Was it the love of mythology or Star Wars, and like, did I just kind of have like the childhood where I just was very familiar with Greco-Roman mythology as a kid, and just kind of saw that like the prequel trilogy tapped into it, and even more so when I got older? Or did my love of Star Wars kind of help me like appreciate Greco-Roman myth, or was it kind of like they kind of caused each other? But I mean, I think we've mentioned a few times that the Matthew Stover Revenge of the Sith novelization like really transcends a solid movie, and it just kind of gets that heroic, tragic tone, like a tragedy, and it kind of says like, it's kind of like they're almost like talking about like Hector and Achilles, and like their tragic demise, and just mythically how like each section is written, like the dark, like this is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker. Maybe we'll talk about that one day. I don't know.
Maybe we'll have to do an actual episode on the Revenge of the Sith novel. And the Revenge of the Sith novel gets a lot of time on the page. I was going to say screen time, but it definitely gets a lot of mentions here in the Revenge of the Sith section of the book, which is on one hand great, I guess, if you've read the book and you're willing to kind of expand out. I don't love it in the sense that if we're really talking about the films and what was presented there, so I go kind of back and forth on how much I like those sections. But the novel, the Matthew Stover's novel, gets a lot of play here in the Revenge of the Sith section.
Yeah, and like I said, this trilogy, it's a tragic story. It's probably what I can think of today, like that kind of in pop culture evokes like Greek mythology, theater, and opera, like in like the biggest like sense, like that most of the public is like pop culture, like seeing, but you kind of start like with a republic and you end with an empire, and it's kind of a depressing pattern we see. We kind of have talked about that, but I kind of like just reading this introduction, it kind of like talked a little bit about like the other chapters we're going to see in this book. But maybe I like this book so much because the author has read and liked what I've read and liked. So maybe that's me being biased, but who knows? Like,
yeah, and for the most part, again, we'll kind of talk on the book as a whole. It does do a good job of when it's making references to something, explaining them in a way that you would understand if you're not super familiar with these other stories or tomes or aspects of various world religions and things like that. So it does do a good job there. I mean, obviously, in reading any sort of educational or more studious look at something, the more you know about the subject, the more you can get out of it, I suppose, in a way, if that makes sense. So, but it does do a good job of, for a general Star Wars fan to pick this book up and read it. I think that there's a lot to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes I'm like, am I looking at a puddle too deeply, or am I looking at something simplistically that is a masterpiece? And I don't know, like maybe Star Wars meets you where you meet it, but I feel we talk about other things, and you know, maybe I'm rationalizing, but should we talk about chapter 20, the hero?
Yeah, let's get into chapter 20, the hero. So we're going to be talking about Anakin here in chapter 20. Anakin also gets a little bit of a chapter here at the end as the villain, but we're starting here with the hero. And I like there's a quote here from Percy Shelley. It says, "Love withers under constraints," and that's kind of the big aspect of the heroic, I guess, journey of Anakin throughout this is really, his love with Padme being under this constraints and seeing that love wither. And into that, then it goes into kind of this, kind of looking at like the Buddhist teachings, and there are a couple of different ways to interpret it, but kind of the one that I landed on here, that I got from the book, was that basically you can't save anyone from anything other than yourself, right? Everything else is out of your hands, so all you can control are your own actions. So really it's, kind of analyzing Anakin in that sense, right? Like, there wasn't really anything, staying with the Jedi, going with Palpatine over to the dark side. There was nothing that Anakin could do that was going to save or keep Padme safe. All he could do was protect her from himself, and ultimately that is the big flaw then within Anakin that he succumbs to and turning to Darth Vader throughout the story.
Yeah, and we kind of see Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, like, kind of justify himself, and his attachment has grown into an obsession, like his forbidden and secret love. Like, I think they do love each other, but, like, love doesn't make you perfect, and we kind of just see how, like, Anakin becomes more obsessed and fearful, and, like, in Attack of the Clones, you can argue, like, Anakin did save Padme a lot, but, like, Padme's never actually in trouble in Revenge of the Sith. The only time she's in danger is when Anakin force chokes her, and it's kind of like, it reminds me of a Matthew Stover quote. I'm not going to get exactly right, like when he was kind of doing like a press for the novelization when it came out. Like, there's love, there's selfless love, and then there's kind of like love where it's not like how you what you want for the other person, but it's kind of like, this is how I feel about you, this is what I want for you, and I just think, like, Anakin wasn't able to love healthily, whether it's due to the dark side or his background or just Jedi secrecy, but, like, when Anakin says he's doing all this for Padme, he's actually just, like, distancing himself from her, and
right.
We kind of talked about in our episode 188 the hero's journey of Revenge of the Sith, like, when Padme is talking to Anakin, like, he cuts over her and says, like, no, I promise you this is what I'm gonna do for you, and like, Padme's like, I don't want that. and right. And death, man. You really can't get around death, and I guess it kind of highlighted, like, this chapter, like, kind of like Anakin kneels at the grave of his mom and says, like, I won't fail again, and he kind of just transfers that to Padme, and it kind of reminds me of Caitlin Dowdy's books that I mentioned. Like, some people who happen to be rich white men, want to somehow eliminate death, and it's like, isn't that how, like, so many, like, dystopian stories start, like, but if you think about it, like, death is what gives life meaning.
Yeah, exactly. And, George Lucas, it's mentioned a couple of times throughout this kind of final chapter of the book here, final section of the book, talks about that, and that is kind of the ultimate, it's like a false boon, I guess, almost for the Sith, and trying to hold on to life, because, life itself is kind of like the most, objection, or I don't know, like like the most lustful object, I guess, for people is to keep living, to cheat death, so to speak. So it speaks a lot to that, as this is kind of the ultimate. Sort of achievement for the Sith in this way, to cheat death. And you see Anakin sort of falling down into that side, right, where he's starting to kind of idealize cheating death to prevent Padme from dying. And that's ultimately what turns him over to the dark side, is that pursuit of this kind of this ultimate rich of the world, is to be able to cheat death. And then that ties in, then obviously we get a couple of mentions of Faust. I believe you already mentioned Faust here, but kind of this Faustian bargain there, which kind of turns here at the tail end of this chapter 20, the hero. Kind of that scene there at the opera house, where basically Anakin has sold his soul to the devil for the chance to keep Padme alive. But really, it's a bargain that was never going to be held up, because it's, like you said, it's not possible for Anakin to protect Padme, because ultimately he is the one that ends up taking her life.
Yeah, and that's sad, but even Anakin in his most heroic in Revenge of the Sith, kind of like rewatching the Star Wars episodes for like the hero's journey episodes we're doing, I kind of noticed, like, with Anakin, like, he's kind of like lock on to him R2. It's like he's someone who would like use like GPS assist, when he's driving, which I mean I kind of do too. But it's kind of like when Anakin can use technology, he does, and compared with Luke, like Luke likes to like kind of be more natural, use the Force a bit more. And Anakin can't let go of anyone, whether it's R2, Obi-Wan, or Padme, most especially Padme. But yeah, maybe like once we talk about Return of the Jedi, we can kind of compare them a little bit more. But I think what is a good aspect to look at with Anakin and Revenge of the Sith, this is a 70s story, like 1970s story, told in the 2000s, but it's a story that George Lucas wanted to tell.
Yeah, ultimately, kind of at the end, it was, the story, at least, kind of the main points of the story were things that he wanted to tell, and didn't change that kind of in any sense, at least from the research that I've done. So it was the story that he intended to tell. But yeah, it's interesting. Kind of the prequels as a whole. They're movies and stories that were told in the late 90s, early 2000s, that were based off of stories that were told in the late 70s, early 80s, based on stories that had been told hundreds of years prior, and kind of the structuring of them. So it's very interesting, kind of. I don't know, like the structure of them, I think is interesting when you step back and you think about it, especially in reading something like this, where it's like, okay, well, those themes came from the story from the 1800s, but it's building into a story that was told in 1977, but the year now is 1999 and we're telling the story. So it's kind of interesting that way if you think about it.
Yeah, I think stories have roots and they kind of grow together, like in a line or many lines, but should we talk about the negotiator, Anakin's bro in the Force?
Anakin's Force bro, yeah, the negotiator, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, this is the third section of this book. This is the third time that Obi-Wan has gotten like the worst chapter of the book. Totally gets the shaft again, I think, here in this section. It doesn't really tie Obi-Wan's character too much. At least I didn't get much out of this chapter of the book. It talks, kind of like Obi-Wan's like, I don't know, like the way that he's almost feeling the Force. It talks about like him like selecting the boga that he ends up riding, which is something, again, from the Matthew Stover book. It's not something that's in the movie. So I don't like like I like that. That's interesting, and I think that the novel is interesting for having that. But I don't like within the confines of this book and tying it into the film, Revenge of the Sith. I don't get a lot of that. I did like it. Did make a nice tie in comparing Obi-Wan to like the character of Merlin, who hides Arthur away, and obviously that's what he's doing with Luke at the end of the story. But yeah, Obi-Wan, I didn't pull a lot out of here in chapter 21, The Negotiator.
I can see where you're coming from. I think this is the best Obi-Wan chapter, but maybe he's just not as interested in Obi-Wan. Maybe he identifies more with Anakin, but yeah. I think, like, Obi-Wan, kind of like, when we see him in 1, he's kind of like not as warm, you know? Like, he's kind of just like a monk who's been raised, you know, in the Jedi religion, like, his whole life, you know? But we kind of see, like, Kenobi become, like, a little bit more warm and friendly as the series goes on. But it is interesting to see, like, in the very first instance, like, the very first, like, scene in... I keep on wanting to say Return of the Sith, but it's Revenge of the Sith, you know? We just see how in sync, like, Anakin and Obi-Wan are. They're, like, flying, like, inches apart, like... And then you just kind of see, like, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, like, just the total destruction of that relationship, fighting on Mustafar. Like, it's like they're fighting themselves, you know?
Right.
But yeah, like, the Disney Plus series Kenobi didn't exist when the author was, you know, writing this section, but I think that's, like, the most interesting time period. And, like, I think, like, the Kenobi series had its pros and cons, but I kind of think, like, the Kenobi series is when we saw Obi-Wan at his most human, you know, kind of, like, rather than being the hero of the story, he becomes the mentor, you know, and becomes the wizened Alec Guinness, you know. Like you said, it's like he becomes Merlin. Like, he's not the Arthur Lancelot anymore. And that reminds me a lot of Jolie, too. Because, like, Jolie was definitely, like, the hero of his time, you know? But I think that's kind of like a mythic conceit. Like, you have your time and then the next generation comes on. It's like, Luke Skywalker can't just be awesome, you know, forever. Like, the next generation has to rise up, you know? And that's what Obi-Wan did.
Yeah, that is what he did. And, I mean, the storytelling of Obi-Wan, I think, is really interesting throughout the film. And, you know, kind of this section here of The Negotiator, it basically is just kind of a retelling of the actions Obi-Wan takes. I did like her. It made me kind of stop and think, like, the chapter opens up kind of with that line that, you know, Obi-Wan says that, you know, Sith Lords are our speciality, which is, you know, filled with kind of this hubris and cockiness that you don't associate with Obi-Wan. So it's kind of out of place, and I don't know if that ties into then just kind of the general mindset of the Jedi at this time, or if it was just, you know, kind of a writing thing. And I stopped to think about it, and I'm like, where does that line even come from? What do you mean, Sith? You know, Sith Lords are your speciality. You've not ever beaten a Sith Lord, so I don't know where that line is.
He killed
coming
Darth
from.
Maul, but not totally, I guess. According to Clone Wars.
That's true. I guess I don't know for sure, but yeah, I kind of liked you know, kind of that analytical bit, and it kind of speaks then to the mindset of the, you know, Jedi Council as a whole, especially here, you know, in Revenge of the Sith, as the Clone Wars are, you know, starting to come to an end, and, you know, maybe some of that brashness from Anakin has rubbed off on him. See the 7 wars of the Clone Wars or the 7 seasons of the Clone Wars that have taken place here before this movie, and the timeline gets started. But I thought that was interesting and kind of an interesting way to kick off this chapter. But then ultimately ends, with him, playing kind of this role of Merlin. I like you tied that into Jolie, because that's kind of true. In the same sense, except he's kind of more hiding himself away, I guess, until a time allows for him to come out and step out of the shadows there on the floors of Kashyyyk to become a mentor again. But yeah, I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, so the next chapter is called Died of Sadness. No, just kidding. It's the goddess. It's about Padme. I like how it kind of says, like, Padme literally gives birth to the original films, And even though, like, I kind of wish some things are different in Revenge of the Sith, like, I think, like, a lot of, like, kind of, like, Padme scenes outside of her relationship with Anakin, like, kind of where she does more political stuff, were cut out, because they didn't want a 4-hour runtime, which I can understand, but it's nice to know they were there. Like, Padme has the integrity to, like, not go down the dark side path with Anakin, even though, like, she loves him, she says, like, I'm not going down this way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this chapter is very good, the goddess here, and speaking about Padme and the way that it ties into different mythologies and stuff like that. The chapter itself, and I'm not saying that about the book, is kind of reductionist of Padme, which I think is something that happens within the film, which we've talked about, kind of in doing our hero's journey analysis and just other discussions we've had throughout kind of the course of the podcast here about Padme, and that she doesn't really do anything in Revenge of the Sith other than be pregnant and give birth to the twins, right? She doesn't have a lot there, and that's exactly what this book is kind of highlighting on. It makes mention of her having, kind of the Japor snippet necklace at the end, which is something, I guess, that ties into Norse mythology. So Freya, who's like the goddess of mothers, basically, and fertility. That was a big thing for in Norse mythology, to be wearing a necklace there as part of fertility. It makes a tie into the Lancelot and Guinevere story, where Lancelot's dreaming of Guinevere's death, and then Guinevere does end up dying, and then Lancelot dies shortly thereafter, which I think is kind of a neat parallel when you think about Padme dying, and then Anakin dying and becoming Darth Vader, shortly thereafter. And then obviously kind of the big one that most people kind of associate with Padme here in this third part of the story is kind of her funeral procession and that gown, which is really made to, kind of almost mimic, Ophelia and drowning there. She's in this blue with her hair kind of up around her face, which is meant to represent kind of water coming in and cascading around her. So those were kind of the big key takeaways that I took from this section. It was probably my favorite chapter of the Revenge of the Sith section, if I'm saying so.
I think it's one of my favorites. Like, maybe at the end I'll be like, this was my favorite, but basically I like them all. But yeah, like, it kind of talks about how, like, Padme's, like, intellectually curious. She's able to, like, kind of be like, what if we're on the wrong side? Like, does the democracy we're fighting for still exist? And, like, she wants to be diplomatic, but unfortunately Padme's life equals, like, the life force of the Republic, so kind of wish she had more to do, but I think, like, it is cool to kind of highlight, like, kind of like the maternal figure in mythologies, like, and sometimes I think that's like a pregnancy, like, never been pregnant, but the people I know who have been, they're like, it's great, but also, like, I'm nauseous and feel horrible all the time, but it's great, and mythologically, like, creating, like, life kind of like in your own body, that's really cool, but in some ways it's like they're like, culture and mythology can be like, mothers do pregnancy and that's it, and it's like, oh, let's highlight that. And it's like, you're on a pedestal. You give birth, like, you don't need to do anything else. That's cool. Like, so, like, I guess that's something, like, I'm kind of finding out, like, myself as a woman. It's like, sometimes, like, men are like, you're awesome, you can do this, you don't need anything more, or, like, don't think about, like, other stuff outside of that. But maybe we'll cut this out, but Cassie is just thinking about things and how they are and what she wants. So,
yeah. Yeah, fair. And yeah, this chapter here does a good job of kind of examining the way that, Padme as, being pregnant and as, the mother and giving birth to the twins, how that is portrayed within the film. It's not really making any sort of statement as to whether it's a good portrayal or not. It just kind of is the way that it is portrayed in the film. And there's a lot to kind of glean from, the inspirations for that. And Padme as a character is great, and it's fun to kind of see these other ties into, what made the character tick, at least on screen.
Yeah. So, it's a good chapter, and I'll just read this last line I wrote down ominously. Divine Mother's last breath is the Dark Father's first. So, I was just being dramatic, I guess.
No,
but
that was ominous.
Yeah. And then we have chapter 23, The Elders. In some ways, like, I kind of wonder if some of these chapters, rather than kind of having, like, the same chapter kind of in sections 1, 2, and 3, whether, like, they could have just, like, done, like, movie-specific chapters and then, like, looked at the prequel trilogy as a whole, because they kind of have, like, the Jedi Council kind of screwed up and is hypocritical chapter, in each of the each of the sections. And I was like, maybe it gets a little old, but it's kind of like you see the council, like, in their massive tower and castle, like it's a fortress, like, and then you kind of see them fall from that. You see that fortress shattered, and I guess that's kind of like, because we're a KOTOR podcast, like the KOTOR and prequel trilogies Jedi Council, while I think they're trying to do good, they're just very flawed.
Yeah, they are definitely very flawed, and I definitely agree with you kind of about the structure of this, because this is our third time of getting a Jedi Council chapter. They're all pretty similar, and I think even in this one, it's like you refer to this chapter for more on that. So we'll get into that a little bit, but there was some stuff that was interesting here. I particularly liked, and it wasn't something that I'd really even kind of considered, but the Jedi Council here in the prequel trilogy is almost, represented in sort of the same light as like the Old Testament of the Bible, the Christian Bible, and then kind of it kicks off into like a more New Testament telling of the story here once Luke, I guess, is born here as kind of the hero then of the original trilogy. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It does talk a lot about in this section about Qui-Gon joining, being one with the Force, and talking with the wills and stuff. But like even in this chapter, it says that this stuff was all cut out from the film, so you'll have to seek out kind of this other supplemental material, which is true, and I like that he had said that. But McDonald had been referencing supplemental stuff and stuff that had been cut for like 22 chapters before this, and this is the first time that he kind of acknowledges that this isn't an actual part of the movie. So I might have liked that a little bit earlier, or been, we're going to be referencing stuff that you have to look up on behind the scenes stuff or books or whatever the case was. I just thought it was interesting that it was finally acknowledged that this is an actual part of the movie. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I liked. Here it's from A Short History of Myth. There's a quote here. It says, it's best to retreat, lie low, and do nothing until the great powers have overreached themselves, which I thought was really neat, because now basically kind of at the end here with Yoda and Obi-Wan are going out into hiding, which is the same thing that the Sith had to do for a long time. So, quite literally now at this point, the Jedi and the Sith have traded places.
Yeah, the author kind of mentions the Revenge of the Sith novel, and what I liked about that is it kind of shows like Yoda represents like the Jedi of the last 1,000 years, and Palpatine represents the Sith of the last 1,000 years. The Jedi were stagnant, like they weren't curious. They kind of like were more obsessed with the canon, the rules, and the Sith kind of adapted. So I like that point, and I do. It kind of this chapter reminded me of how Matthew Stover said like his dream Star Wars novel would have been. It never happened. Because I think they're trying to keep Plagueis a little bit more mysterious, But his dream novel was, like, he wanted to have Qui-Gon and Plagueis searching for the same thing. Kind of like, how does one transcend death? And Plagueis searches for it, but he never really found it, But Qui-Gon ended up finding it, like, because Qui-Gon kind of like was more selfless, and Plagueis was a little bit more egocentric, but it's so tantalizing to know like maybe that was like thought of. It would have been cool.
Yeah, it would be cool, and I think that is that would be a really interesting story to tell. It would be interesting to kind of get that story and get a little bit more of that history. I would imagine that that's probably something we're going to get here kind of at some point, maybe digging into a little bit more kind of that aspect of it. And, obviously, the Kenobi show, you get the little Force goes to Qui-Gon there at the end. So certainly, it's on some people's minds too there. But yeah, hopefully, because that would be a really fascinating read and very interesting to read. And I know that people love the Plagueis novel, so maybe that's something else I'm gonna have to revisit. I haven't read it since back when it came out, so might need to get back into that one and see what I think about that with the lens of some more Star Wars material that we've had since I would have read it the first time.
Yeah. And then we have chapter 24, The Clones, and some of these chapters, kind of like about Kenobi and the clones, were kind of written before we got like more material like the Clone Wars and the Rebels cartoons and other shows, but in Revenge of the Sith, the clones become a little bit more individualized. And we definitely see that in the Clone Wars cartoon. Like, the clones just decorate their armor, to show their personality, And I like this quote, like, in much of myth, like, their armor is actually who a person is, an outward manifestation of the inner self. And I think that kind of shows, like, they're trying to get more, personality rather than just be like, this is what you need to do. Like, I wonder if clones have free will, and I think it kind of shows like the Jedi, like, they're kind of just ordering like literal people around who are designed to follow orders, like, and I'm like, this kind of feels like slavery.
Right, yeah.
So I'm like, the Jedi shouldn't probably be doing that, like, and it kind of shows like they lost their way and are ordering clones. I have one question, and then you can give your thoughts on this chapter, but what does Order 66 and the clones' conditioning, like, represent to you?
I don't know. Like, let's see, I mean, I guess it means that there was obviously some forethought put into this war, obviously, and I'm just reading it's the Rise of the Red Blade, which actually I'm just kind of getting into it, but it actually is talking about kind of this war machine piece to it. But I think kind of just, if I think about it, just quickly off the top of my head, it kind of represents, the forethought of this war. And obviously, through watching the prequel trilogy, you learn more and more about who Palpatine is, and kind of the preparations that were made for the war. But it really is indicative of that this was well thought out, and planned, and prepared. And then I guess to speak just on like the part of the clones, then it speaks into what really is free will, and how does that relate then to kind of military structures and things like that. So those are kind of the two things that I take away, just if you ask me that question, just kind of off the top of my head, when I think about what did Order 66 represent. And especially get into stuff like the Clone Wars, and with the Ahsoka and Rex and stuff like that, and how much hesitation was there. Was it literally just a switch that could be flipped on, and things like that. So I think speaks to kind of the I don't know, kind of the personal choice that you have, and gets into like following orders and stuff like that, which is where the stormtroopers literally got their names from World War II and stuff like that. So
yeah. I mean, I read this like spring, summer 2020 to like the start of 2021. So I guess like maybe I was kind of like thinking about like a lot of the real life discussions that were happening, like especially about police brutality and stuff. And I was kind of like, maybe the clones are kind of meant to show like conditioning and systems can be flawed, and maybe they're bad, and the key is to think for yourself, and not just have mechanical thinking like this is how it has been done, so I just have to do it this way, and the key is just to do the right thing, even if you have to be outside of the system to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because literally, it's kind of the push of the button from the person at the top. It completely changes the way that the clones here in this story are operating, and kind of the actions that they're taking. So yeah, so how much is it personal choice, or freedom to make your own decisions, and freedom of thought versus what's instilled within you from an early age. The section kind of does a pretty good job of talking about the clones kind of in that sense, which is really something more we get in Attack of the Clones, where you're seeing kind of the soldiers there, as kids, like learning and things. And I think in the section it says there's a difference between like education and intelligence or something like that. I'm misquoting it for sure, but
indoctrination, I think.
Yeah, so so it definitely kind of ties into a lot of that, and where does free will fall into all of that. And obviously the clones were always meant to take place of kind of the stormtroopers and the way that they operated within the world of Star Wars. So I think that stuff like that is pretty interesting for sure. The clones chapter here, you kind of hit on it. Was one of my big things that I took away from it was kind of this theme that you get like in the Iliad, where the armor is who the person is, and basically that is the same here with the clones. The clones are clones because they're wearing their clone armor in phase 1, phase 2, and then do get a little bit more personality and stuff, obviously, within the animated series, the Clone Wars, but here as well in Revenge of the Sith. It talks a lot about Matthew Stover's book, and kind of the way that he's characterizing the clones within that book, which I think is interesting. He also says that the Jedi basically already failed when they joined the war, which really I think was something that probably should have went up in the chapter before, into the Elders chapter, but that's something that gets brought up here in the clone section. But the one other thing I wanted to hit on here was there is a quote here at the end from William Blake. It's a poem. And it says, "The iron hand crushed the tyrant's head and became a tyrant in his stead." So if you look at the clones as kind of this, I don't know, like militarized machine, right? They kind of they came out and they took out the tyrant here, I guess the separatists kind of in this sense, but by doing so they became, or at least became, like the force of the tyrant in that action. As the clones started out as an army for quote unquote good, theoretically, and then obviously became what we know of as like the stormtroopers and the Galactic Empire. So
yeah, those are great thoughts. So I have to say that the next chapter is probably my least favorite of this section. The general, about General Grievous. They're like, he foreshadows Vader, and it's like, I kind of already knew that, but
kind of got that. The chapter about General Grievous is longer than General Grievous is in the movie, I guess. So there's that.
It's interesting because, like, General Grievous, like, before Revenge of the Sith came out and the Clone Wars cartoons, like, he was like a big, scary alien in the expanded universe before that. And, like, he kind of became a little bit ridiculous in the Clone Wars. But he's someone with, like, multiple origin stories, so I guess you could say he is the Joker of the Star Wars universe.
That's right. Actually, the Joker gets a bit of a mention in the next chapter, but yeah, Grievous is a strange character to think about here within the confines of Revenge of the Sith. But then, yeah, the way he's portrayed in the Clone Wars, he's almost like this, I don't know, kind of like this bumbling, clown kind of a figure versus, what you got in the, like the 2D animated Clone Wars, where he's like this, like
assassin.
Crazy, like menacing assassin, dealer of death. And I think that it tries to kind of hit on that within this film, but he basically runs away kind of from the first encounter, and then he has the 4 lightsabers, so you're like, ooh, this guy is serious, but Obi-Wan dispatches him in about 4 seconds or something in that fight. So I don't know, Grievous is an interesting character. I really love the character design of General Grievous, which is something else, a different topic for another
cool
day.
Mask.
But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot here. Obviously, it's kind of an early look, or a little bit of foreshadowing of what Anakin's going to become. More machine now than man. I did like that they kind of linked him back to kind of Nosferatu, and he does have that kind of look within his eyes. If you look at like the old classic like Nosferatu like poster of the film or stuff there, where he's kind of like hunched over and he's looking back over his shoulder. He has kind of that same kind of look, so I like that. And how he's
true.
kind of hunched over. I like it made the kind of tie that General Grievous kind of sort of represents the galaxy. He's very strong but fragile kind of at the same time, and you don't really know what it is. Kind of the same as the galaxy. It's strong on one hand, but also very fragile kind of in this moment during war, and can literally kind of go either way. Something that was weird I thought about this chapter, maybe it's because there wasn't a lot. There's kind of this section where it's talking, I don't know, it's like Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance or something, which basically says that machines are not inherently evil, but then it also includes a quote from William Blake that says that machines are inherently evil. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of mixed messaging. You need to
come to your own conclusions.
There, you got to see. You're gonna have to come to your own conclusions there if machines are good or bad. But yeah, obviously General Grievous is a bit of a look into Anakin turning into Darth Vader, and that was about it.
That's funny you mentioned Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I literally have the copy right next to me. It's on my to be read list, but I guess before we move to the Emperor chapter, I do like how it kind of mentions the prequel trilogy. It kind of like the machinery in the ships like seem more crafterly, like kind of pre-industrial revolution, like how they talk about some of the ships in the prequel trilogy. It's like we designed them a little bit like jewelry, and then you kind of have like in the original trilogy more mass-produced things. Like kind of post-industrial revolution, they don't look as nice. So I like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially, kind of here within the prequel trilogy, basically all of the things that we're seeing, or a lot of the things that we're seeing, are coming from Naboo, which is this beautiful place that's full of artists and things like that. So you have your Naboo fighters and the the Nubian star cruisers, and even like R2D2 is, well crafted and beautiful and handmade and those kinds of things. And converse to that, you have things like General Grievous or the battle droids, which are kind of white or just like off white, and very very kind of almost not that I think that the battle droid design is not cool, but very kind of generic looking and all very the same and stuff like that. So
yeah. Then we have the Emperor chapter, and kind of reading it, I was like, how we did an episode on Skywalker, A Family at War? Like, I wish there was like a book like Palpatine, How I Did It, or something just about Palpatine, how he took over the galaxy. Because he's just so interesting.
Yeah, I would love an autobiography from Palpatine. That would be amazing. We'll have to get something in the works for that. Yeah, that would be really interesting to kind of lay it out kind of from Palpatine's like perspective of what he was doing and when he was doing it and why he was doing it. Like, that would be really fascinating to read. I think kind of like almost like the war documents or something from Emperor Palpatine. That would be pretty fascinating. But yeah, the section is pretty good. It talks about the Emperor. It talks kind of picks up there in the Opera House scene, which is where we kind of left Anakin. Kind of from the first chapter of this section, and it makes kind of the visual connection there of the water scene is kind of looking like this fertilized egg. Which leads you to wonder then if that's meant to represent that Anakin was created in some way by the Sith here, birth of these midichlorians, or what that's going to mean. And obviously we get into kind of the cloning aspects of Palpatine himself later into the saga. But I really liked, never even would have imagined it, but when Palpatine is fighting Yoda there, and he has that kind of maniacal laugh, he kind of tied that into kind of the Joker's laugh there within Batman, and I like that a lot. I don't know that was really probably what George Lucas was thinking of when he had the laugh written in there, but
I think he was just like, "You're insane, laugh."
you're an insane person. You're an insane person. The last kind of thing that I picked up here, kind of in this section, McDonald kind of compared Emperor Palpatine to Midas, and I kind of see that, and I kind of see where he's coming from with that. And there's a couple quotes then about tyrants and tyrannical leaders and things, and that you can't ever win because ultimately you end up being isolated, which maybe is true, but I don't know. And I think that it is true kind of in the real world. But here for Palpatine, we don't ever like see Palpatine like in this state of loneliness or anything like that. So while I agree that those links are kind of there, those parallels are kind of there, it doesn't really play out in the same way that like the Midas story does, or kind of this isolated incident. I guess maybe you could say that when you get to Return of the Jedi, that being betrayed by Darth Vader is kind of a highlight of that isolation. But Palpatine was already moved on from Vader at that point. He wanted Luke, so I don't know. I think that those ties are there, but I don't think they ever really come to fruition within the confines of the Star Wars story.
Yeah, I don't really know what Palpatine's like character is. It's kind of just he's written to be evil, kind of Machiavellian, and kind of like the devil. But I don't know. Does the Emperor dream of like, I don't know, like having a fulfilling family or personal life? I don't know, but right. He's definitely the crown jewel, like the apotheosis of the Sith philosophy. But I liked how they also kind of made it clear, like, Palpatine's public face is the real mask. It's kind of like Batman Begins, where Rachel, like, holds, like, Bruce's face, and it's like, this is your real mask. Like, maybe we should have had that scene in Star Wars at some point. But do you think Palpatine thinks he's doing the right thing or the best thing for the galaxy? Or do you think he just knows what he's doing is wrong and doesn't care?
I think that he's doing it. I don't think he's doing it out of any sort of sense of what is right for the galaxy or the best for the galaxy, or even from the stance of, you know, what he's saying is for, you know, peace in the galaxy. I think that he's doing it to accumulate power so he can figure out how to live on forever. Especially then, is, you know, it kind of ties into the rise of Skywalker and the characterization of the Emperor there. But I don't think he was doing it for any reason other than just, you know, amassing knowledge and wealth and strength in an effort to keep himself alive. I don't think he had really sort of any thoughts beyond that.
He probably didn't run a charity in his free time.
He probably did not, no. Not even for the tax write-offs. Emperor Palpatine doesn't care.
Yeah. But it is interesting how Anakin begins this trilogy as a slave, and he's freed, but kind of Palpatine becomes his master, so, like, Anakin kind of ends as a slave too, you know? But I just have to say, I don't believe Plagueis or Palpatine is Anakin's father. I believe the Force is his dad. You know, like, it kind of seems like Plagueis and Palpatine were doing experiments, and then the Force is like, I need to stop this. So the Force struck back by creating Anakin to take them down, but maybe I just need to believe that, so...
Okay. Yeah, that could be, that's possible.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on the Emperor?
No, I think that pretty much closes it out for the Emperor. But the Emperor, you know, is an important aspect here, and obviously is the one that's going to be turning the tide here for poor Anakin as we get into the final chapter of Revenge of the Sith, chapter 27, the villain. So we're back talking about Anakin, but now we're looking at him through the lens of Darth Vader.
Yeah. Mustafar equals hell equals Anakin, and kind of something I noticed, like, I can't remember if it was the Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith Hero's Journey episode, but Naboo kind of equals Padme. It's like a beautiful green world with, you know, like a thriving democracy, and that planet doesn't even have a molten core, so it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like Padme and Anakin are just total opposites.
Yeah, absolutely. They're kind of total opposites, you know, both from the place they were born, Naboo and Tatooine, and the places, you know, that the Anakin is going to die here on Mustafar, and the place where he, you know, basically kills Padme, poor Padme, out of breaking her poor heart. I like it. It kind of ties into that a little bit, right? It talks about Padme being from Naboo, but then, you know, ultimately perishes on, you know, kind of this crater within, you know, that asteroid. There was a Polis Massa. Is that what it's called? I can never remember the name of it.
It's an asteroid.
You know, you know, so it's kind of that. I think I might have mentioned that maybe in the fall section, that, you know, born to this beautiful place and then perishes there. And, you know, same for Anakin Skywalker here, obviously, is you know, perishing on Mustafar, which is meant to represent hell, of course. And yeah, couldn't be kind of more opposite in their, you know, upbringings and then their ultimate demise. And that's kind of one of the themes here for the villain section is it talks a lot through the book and in this section kind of to the Buddhist teachings that to grasp something in life is to strangle and kill it, and that is literally what Anakin does here at the end of the film.
Yeah. I like how the book kind of makes the point, like, it's kind of a Buddhist belief, like, the person who does something wrong is not just punished because of what they do, but by the act itself, you know? On Mustafar, we see Anakin cry, which kind of shows a little bit of realization of what he did. Like, he started down a path and can't see the way off, you know? Like, he made a pact with the devil, but now he's also kind of like a devil, and we definitely see that self-rationalization to Padme on Coruscant and post-Order 66, and he's also definitely rationalizing himself to Obi-Wan on Mustafar. And in that Mustafar duel with Obi-Wan, the way he's kind of talking, like, Padme, he's like, you will not take her from me. Like, Padme, it's kind of like, Padme is like his possession right there. It's a very narrow, kind of Cyclops view of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is, and it kind of goes in a little bit further than to talk about, kind of the other aspect of Buddhism, and that is to, the ego, right? To be without ego, or to have an ego, and that is kind of the ultimate downfall. And obviously here it's the ultimate downfall of, Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader is, it's really his own sort of ego, his own desire to have exactly what he wants. Is going to be kind of the ultimate downfall of him. And yeah, especially there, right from the point when, Padme, he force chokes Padme, she falls to the ground, and from kind of that point on through the rest of the film until he turns into Darth Vader, and then he has that thing where he says Padme no, and yells and rises up very Frankenstein's monster style. Kind of everything that he says kind of in the rest of that section is him, rationalizing his ego there towards Padme, and his actions there at the end of the film.
Yeah. Darth Vader is ego personified. But he's kind of less than human, like, which kind of like brings up the William Blake quote. When you try to become more, well, I'm paraphrasing here actually, because he'd be like, William Blake wouldn't be like, so, when you become more than human, you become less. But yeah, so I was paraphrasing, not literally quoting.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, maybe, how like General Grievous's ship at the beginning is called the Invisible Hand?
Mm-hmm.
Alan Watts, who is a profound philosopher who probably inspired, like a lot of thinkers like in the 60s and 70s, and definitely George Lucas growing up in California, like he described ego as an invisible hand. And I was like, oh, I think that was like kind of a cool detail. They named the ship that, but you can grasp or hold hands or let go, but the key is to flow, adapt, and be open. And I'm just scanning my notes. I'm trying to, summarize. But Anakin literally kills a youngling who looks like little Annie, and that kind of reminds me of like in KOTOR when you can possibly go down the dark-sided path, like killing Mission. I think it's kind of like that. You're killing the childhood innocence,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Is looking, kind of into that, and it's, killing, obviously it's killing the younglings at the Jedi Temple, but it's also, killing, what the Jedi were, what the Jedi could potentially become, killing your own past almost in a way. And then to tie back into what you're saying there about the invisible hand, that is, literally how Anakin is killing Padme, and, goes on as Darth Vader to be kind of weapon of choice, right? As doing that force choke as an invisible hand there as well. So
Grasping.
Yeah, I think exactly. It's kind of this ultimate pursuit of ego, or the downfall of ego. I did like here in the section too, it made mention of Osiris, who is buried or entombed within like black armor to live for eternity, and that's kind of the same thing that's happening to Anakin Skywalker here. I don't know if that was something that was on the mind back in 1977, but I think it probably definitely was here in the storytelling for Revenge of the Sith.
For sure. And I have to say that Disney canonizing Fortress Vader on Mustafar is maybe one of the smartest aspects that Disney added to the Star Wars canon. Like, it fits so well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, especially if you think about, kind of the Skywalker saga and the ultimate sort of evil of that is, Palpatine and the one pulling the strings and the one who's, keeping Vader on a leash, then you would want to have Vader, kind of there residing in the place where he ultimately fell, right? So you're going to keep him at his lowest of depths. So that makes a lot of sense then. So
yeah, shall we cover the afterword, the maker?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the kind of conclusion there of the Revenge of the Sith section here for Star Wars Heresies. You can go back to some previous episodes if you want the Phantom Menace and a little bit more kind of background on the book and how the book was structured. And then we did the Attack of the Clones section as well. But then, yeah, we get into kind of the little afterword here, all about the maker. And I'll start it off here with this quote, and it says, "Ultimately, I have to tell a story. So the story comes first, and I can't really play it to an audience. I mean, the story is what the story is," says George Lucas. So, yeah, then basically this just kind of goes through and it talks, a little bit about George Lucas and kind of who he was, and I guess kind of just more so, I think, kind of the author's general thoughts on the prequels and how it played out and the things that the author kind of took out of it, and it talks a little bit, it gets into kind of the backlash almost from the prequels, and kind of rationalizes it in a way, and definitely acknowledges that was an aspect of the prequels. We love the prequels, but it's inarguable to say that it was not met with the best reception from all sides, for sure, and it kind of makes note of that, and does its best to kind of come to terms with it here in the final section.
Yeah, and the afterword, the maker is kind of like about George Lucas and the intentions, and it kind of says, like, George Lucas is a storyteller. He might not be people's favorite, like, screenwriter or director, but he started out as an editor in film school, and like a lot of his like short films or films he made, like, they're kind of more abstract, and I think, like, as an editor, he kind of prioritizes, like, abstract and the image over, like, the script and maybe, like, performance and method acting, but Star Wars is kind of a little bit more as a silent movie. I think Star Wars meets you where you meet it, and with the prequel trilogy, like, Lucas didn't have someone else direct it, so I think he was more interested and involved in the prequel trilogy, and the fans kind of turned on him, and the critics also, like, but in a way, like, the prequels were kind of meant to ruin the originals, like, the galaxy goes to hell in them, and I guess, like, George Lucas, like, and Joseph Campbell, and I mean a few others, but we don't need to list all the creative influences, like Cassia has, but the George Lucas in my head, like, means a lot to me, and if I ever met George Lucas, maybe it would be like meeting God or meeting a hero or an idol, and, like, that would be disappointing, but kind of like when I was reading this book, like, it was Corona, like, a really isolating time, and I was kind of deconstructing, thinking about a lot, and maybe Star Wars has meant too much to me in my life, or at, like, certain points in my life, like, maybe it's, like, a little bit like a backup religion, myth, or philosophy, but kind of like during Corona, like, I think, like, mental health wise, like, and psychically, like, Corona injured, like, a lot of people, and, like, I think, like, a crutch is something you need, like, when you need it, and, like, maybe when you kind of outgrow it, like, you can, and like, I mean, we talk about other things, and we have other things going on, but I love episodes 1 through 6. I love KOTOR, the KOTOR series, and I love The Last Jedi, and I think I've kind of made peace with the fact that Star Wars is kind of like Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. You know, like, whether Homer was a real person or not, you know, he might have been lots of people. He might have been a man. He might have been a woman. Who knows? Like, it's too long ago, but, like, there are, like, sequels to the Odyssey that are out there, like, but no one cares about them because, like, they don't think Homer wrote them, you know? So, like, who knows? Like, maybe Star Wars doesn't need to be like, this is the Homeric Star Wars, you know? Like, I think I've made peace, like, it's not just George Lucas behind Star Wars anymore, you know? And there's some random stuff out there, you know, like made pre-Disney sale and post-Disney sale. And there's a lot that Disney has made with skill and intent. And I think, like, we just have to, like, go in the future, like, seeing what fits, you know? Like, maybe Disney is more driven by Disney Plus or, like, profit driven than, like, what Lucas made, but I don't think that's necessarily a hopeless thing. Like, maybe every Star Wars property doesn't have to, like, you know, quote, say something. It can just be fun. And I don't need to love and canonize in my head, like, every Star Wars story, you know? And I like what I like, and I was like, oh, maybe I don't need to see this season of The Mandalorian when it comes out. Maybe I will in the future. But maybe that was just rambling, but I was trying to speak to what, like, kind of rereading this section kind of made me think about. But this book is so literate and deep. I love it, and I'm glad we've talked about it. Like, we've talked a lot about it.
Yeah.
I love Star Wars and the prequel trilogy, and this book helps illustrate why. And what do you think?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that this book is really good in terms of kind of breaking down those stories, and I think that it could be a valuable tool if you're someone that doesn't care for the prequel trilogy. I think that this book would be a really good read for someone who maybe doesn't love it or doesn't understand it as well, because it really kind of gets into well, you can't really ever get into someone's actual mindset, but, you know, it kind of, you know, it takes a deeper look at, you know, why these stories were told in the way that they were. And I think that is really interesting, and probably something that, you know, in terms of Star Wars or in terms of most stories that people could get a lot out of, instead of, you know, kind of this quick, you know, 2023 year that we live in, you know, quick reaction, quick to be judgmental, and you know, just throw things in this quick kind of turnaround, and, you know, fast media cycles and stuff that we're living in, to look at something a little bit more introspectively and be like, well, I didn't love that, but let me take a look at it and see why, or see what they were trying to say, or, you know, maybe then you can look at it in a different light. So I think from that stance, a book like this really is invaluable. You know, Cassie, you and I really enjoy storytelling, and, you know, kind of its various forms and things like that. You love to read. I will read things that you tell me that I have to read for the podcast mostly. I do like to read too, but I really like you know, kind of analyzing the way stories were told, have been told, are being told, and how they kind of relate to each other. You know, especially in something like, you know, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, or you know, stuff like that, and, you know, just the story structures and stuff like that. But yeah, this is a really interesting look kind of at these stories that George Lucas told. And, you know, it's kind of debatable on how much that story changed, you know, from the time that he would have originally written it, and, you know, facing, you know, kind of the reception of it, and things like that, and how much characters might have changed or might not have changed, and stuff like that. And you'll never know the real answer for that, and I don't think that is that important to know the real answer to that, because these are the films that we got. They were the ones that came out, and you have to take that for what it is. So, to that end, I think that this book was really good, definitely worth a read. Like I said, if you really love the prequels, you'll get a lot out of this book. If you don't like the prequels as much, but you still like Star Wars, maybe you like the sequel trilogy more than the prequel trilogy, maybe you're only like the original trilogy, maybe you only like Star Wars Resistance, reading something like this, or something analytical about another part of this fandom that you're in, I think is really beneficial in terms of kind of understanding where these stories came from in the first place.
Yeah, and I think you can either ignore a story, or you can maybe kind of like try to understand it where it's at, and I think either of those are healthy, healthier than kind of just saying, this sucks, let me monetize my angry feelings, I think that's it's a little bit better to either just be like, this isn't for me, and walk away, or just kind of like, I don't know, maybe analyze it from a place of good faith. But yeah, all in all, I love the Star Wars Heresies, and I don't know, maybe I push a lot of books on people, and it's like, this is what I think, but I'm glad you were game and wanted to read it, and I promise the Star Wars palette is a whole lot easier of a read.
Yeah, there you go. That's what we've got coming up next, at least book-wise here. We're going to be talking about the palette of Star Wars for the original trilogy, so going to be getting into kind of the hero's journey analysis of the original trilogy, and getting into the Star Wars palette for that one. And if you have any good recommendations for sequel trilogy books that are kind of in the same vein, a little bit more academic looks at the films, definitely pass those our way, because we're interested in reading those and potentially getting some more stuff to talk about here on the podcast. And we like looking at these stories a little bit more analytically too, so stay tuned for that, and pass any of that info our way. We'd appreciate it.
All right, and may the Force be with you.